So I want to talk to you for a few minutes. We're living in a time of epic change. We're living in a time of great awakening. The tipping point has come, the shoe has dropped, the worm has turned, and the shift has hit the fan, and we're just getting going. Everything is up for grabs and everything is at stake. As Paul Gilding has said, as human beings, we're usually late and then fast. As the world has plunged from urgency to emergency, emergency responders are coming out in force. The invisible hand of the climate is trumping the invisible hand of the market. We're at the start of the biggest, fastest cultural, economic, and industrial revolution in history. The decline and fall of the fossil fuel industry is at hand. Coal is in free fall, shells pulled out of the Arctic, and the divest-invest movement recently hit $2.6 trillion, a 50-fold increase in 1 year. Globally, we're now adding more capacity for renewable power annually than for fossil fuels. Distributed clean energy is making a disruptive leap, decentralizing power both literally and figuratively. US emissions peaked in 2007 and have fallen since. China is shortening its timeline for peak emissions to 2025 and driving a ginormous clean energy revolution of unimaginable scope and scale. India is finally moving. The IMF has concluded that saving the planet would be cheap and might even be free. Such a deal. Business is having a conversion. 36 large companies have committed to 100% clean energy, clean electricity from renewables. This year, 437 companies, including Microsoft, are calculating an internal carbon tax, with 583 more to follow very soon. About 40 countries and more than 20 cities, states, and regions are putting a price on carbon. China's recent landmark commitment to a national cap-and-trade program was quietly built behind the scenes by California and several large Chinese provinces, illustrating the game-changing bottom-up power of green blocs of cities and states, which actually account for 50 to 80% of GHG reduction implementation around the world. As the world's 8th largest economy, California is growing its GDP and population while shrinking its carbon footprint. It's now committed to 50% clean energy electricity by 2030. It ranks among the top 10 nations in total renewable energy generation, share of electricity from renewable sources, and highest energy productivity. California's groundbreaking climate justice policy commits over 30% of the state's cap-and-trade revenues to environmental justice for disadvantaged communities by funding green jobs, public health, and economic and social justice. It's a global game changer, and that money will be in the billions in the years to come. The priceless value of ecosystem services is actually becoming embedded in federal and local policy to leverage green infrastructure investments that restore natural systems. In the face of California's 1,000-year drought and inferno of wildfires, Native American tribal members are collaborating with scientists and U.S. Forest Service officials to revive traditional indigenous ecological practices, restoring their roles as skilled, wise land managers. A large-scale movement toward climate-friendly agriculture is emerging to radically increase carbon sequestration while building food security and resilience on farms. The Black Lives Matter movement catalyzed a long overdue reality-based race conversation as smartphone cameras keep revealing the systemic racism, murder, and abuse that are routine in African American communities. The Confederate flag can no longer fly in public places and state houses. And the mass incarceration nightmare is finally coming to an end. Donald Trump's trash talk unwittingly has sparked a Latino spring that's unstoppable. And that's in the nation's most ecologically conscious community, which we'll hear about on Sunday, actually. Rainbow lights bathed the White House after the Supremes ruled for gay marriage. The Pope tossed a Hail Mary pass into these hopefully not the end times. He linked the twin crises of climate and inequality with capitalism. Sanctifying our kinship with all creation, he denounced the deified market and new colonialism of austerity programs. He called in the global North's ecological debt to the global South. Quoting a 4th century bishop, he branded the unfettered pursuit of money as the dung of the devil. There is a God. Epic change, but make no mistake, the Great Awakening comes with a wicked hangover. Climate change is happening bigger and faster than even the alarmists predicted. It's shuffling ecosystems on a scale not seen in millions of years. The worst case scenarios are just as likely as the best case ones, which are already dreadful. The supposed safe level of a 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise is not safe at all, and abrupt climate change can happen in a lifetime. Dick Cheney advocated his 1% doctrine, that if there's a 1% chance of a major terrorist attack, we have to treat it as though it were a certainty with an overwhelming response. Climate disruption is a certainty. We need to move to 100% renewables at warp speed, knowing that ecological well-being and social justice are one notion, indivisible. Our charge now is to turn epic change into systemic change in culture, policy, law, and governance. But epic change is by its nature transformative change. What does that actually look like? In 1979, Exxon intern Steve Knisley was tasked with analyzing how global warming might affect future fuel use. Knisley projected that by 2010, there would be 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere and, quote, noticeable temperature changes. He foresaw that the fossil fuel industry might need to leave 80% of its recoverable reserves in the ground. By 1981, Exxon scientists and researchers had concluded that rising CO2 levels could create catastrophic impacts within the first half of the 21st century. But starting in 1989, the same year as the Exxon Valdez spill, the company began arguing that the uncertainty inherent in computer models makes them useless for important policy decisions. Exxon knowingly ramped up the fossil fuel industry despite the calamitous probabilities. Call it racket science. This is criminal behavior on the scale of a psychopathic James Bond cartoon villain. In 2013, Richard Heed, a scientist at the Climate Accountability Institute, gathered a group of lawyers. He showed them that nearly 2/3 of the world's CO2 and methane emissions dating back to the birth of the industrial era were the responsibility of just 90 companies. The resulting lawsuits against these carbon majors are radical because they shift the culpability from developed countries to corporations. The lawsuits assign blame and name names. Big Carbon is taking it very, very seriously because a federal appeals court found that US cities and individuals suffering economic and other damages have standing to sue under the National Environmental Policy Act. The companies are also vulnerable to fraud and civil conspiracy charges for funding climate deniers while internally acknowledging the science. But isn't it time for a sentence of corporate death, capital punishment for crimes of capital? As Tom Lindsay and Mari Margill of the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund point out, sustainability is illegal under our system of law. Building economically and environmentally sustainable communities cannot be done through a system that elevates the rights of corporate entities above the rights of people and communities, nor can it be done through a corporate culture whose primary overriding goal is the production of endless more. It makes everything standing in the way illegal and in many cases unconstitutional. CELDF is now working to build a new structure of law with close to 200 communities in 12 states. They've passed ordinances legally recognizing their community's right to self-government. They've eliminated competing claims to corporate rights of personhood. They've recognized rights for nature and ecosystems, and they're establishing local bills of rights that prohibit unsustainable practices that would violate those rights. What else does transformative change look like? Domestic violence is the leading cause of injury and death for women worldwide between the ages of 15 and 44, a third of all women in the world. As the authors of the remarkable book, Sex and World Peace, document, the physical security of women is strongly associated with the peacefulness of the state. States with higher levels of gender equality are less likely to rely on military force to settle international disputes, to threaten, display, or use force, or go to war once engaged in an intrastate dispute. They're also less likely to experience domestic conflict. As the authors show, states that have improved the status of women are, as a rule, healthier, wealthier, less corrupt, more democratic, and more powerful on the world stage in the early 21st century. The authors conclude this: the primary challenge of the 21st century is to eliminate violence against women and remove the barriers to the development of their strength and creativity and voice. Establishing gender equality in interpersonal relationships, in homes, in the workplace, and in decision-making bodies at all levels will change states and their behaviors, and in turn will bring peace and prosperity to the world. They say we need to work for women's physical security, equity in family law, and parity in the councils of decision-making. The true clash of civilizations, they say, will not be along the lines of Samuel Huntington between Islam and the West, but along the fault lines between civilizations that treat women as equal members of the human species and civilizations that cannot or will not do so. Underlying these realities, says social psychologist Alice Eagley, is that gender stereotypes trump race stereotypes in every social science test. According to philosopher Sylviane Agacinski, it's always the difference of the sexes that serves as a model for all other differences, and the male-female hierarchy that is taken as a metaphor for all interethnic hierarchies. To address this profound gender wound, Will Keepan and Cynthia Bricks developed a process called gender reconciliation. It applies the principles of racial truth and reconciliation from South Africa's apartheid era. They create a truth forum for women and men to come together safely, to speak truth to their experience and seek healing. South Africa has the world's worst rate of violence against women and girls. Will and Cynthia were invited there by the Deputy Minister of Health to work with members of Parliament and senior government and NGO leaders. It led to a partnership with the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. At the end of the workshop, the men made this statement: "The bonds of humanity have been broken. We acknowledge that we have shared in the unfair and unjust advantage that has upset the Creator's intended balance of human relationships for love, companionship, and cooperation. We further acknowledge that we have been complicit in breaking the intended dream of equality. So we now come forward to say to you, we are sorry. We affirm that we want to start anew, and we ask you to accept our offer to take responsibility as we commit ourselves to live out and challenge and support all men everywhere to live and work for gender equality and thereby seek reconciliation." As Will Keepan observes, what men discover is that the greatest male privilege is to participate in the deconstruction of the patriarchy. And he sees a direct relationship between our relationship to the feminine and our relationship to Mother Earth. This is what transformative change looks like. As Adam Hochschild describes in his landmark book, Buried in Chains, on May 22nd in 1787 in London, 12 determined men gathered to begin one of the most ambitious and brilliantly organized citizens' movements in history. The British abolitionists were shocked by what they came to learn about slavery and the slave trade. At the end of the 18th century, well over 3/4 of people in the world were in bondage of one kind or another, of various systems of slavery or serfdom. Slavery was foundational to the world economy. As Hochschild observes, there's always something mysterious about human empathy, and when we feel it and when we don't. Its sudden upwelling at this particular moment caught everyone by surprise. It was the first time a large number of people became outraged and stayed outraged for many years over someone else's rights. Within 5 years, the issue of slavery was center stage in British political life and soon made illegal. By the close of the next century, slavery was, at least on paper, illegal almost everywhere. The abolition we seek today is the abolition of fossil fuels and the injustice and blood this plutocracy is built upon. But we have years, not a century, to make this epic change. Chief Oren Lyons of the Iroquois Six Nations recalls the original instructions the peacemaker gave his people that brought to a close an era of never-ending war. The principles are peace, clear thinking, equity, to be united, and to make decisions based on the well-being of the seventh generation to come. As Oren recounts, when the leaders received these instructions to tell the people, they called it one bowl, one spoon. One bowl being the earth, one spoon being to share. We are not alone. In his astonishing book, Beyond Words, What Animals Think by Carl Safina, he tells this story. In the Bahamas, wild dolphins had developed a close relationship with scientific researcher Denise Hertzing and her crew. Over decades, the dolphins greeted the expeditions like a reunion of friends. Then, one year, the dolphins refused to approach the boat, even to bow ride, their special pleasure. When the boat's captain dove into the water, the dolphins strangely kept their distance. Then the crew discovered an expeditioner had died in his bunk. As the vessel chugged toward port, Hertzing recalls, the dolphins came to the side of our boat, not riding the bow as usual, but instead flanking us 50 feet away in an aquatic escort. They appeared to be conducting a solemn, organized funeral ceremony. We are so not alone. One bowl, one spoon. Thank you. Thank you. Love you.